It started with a 19-gun salute and ended with the inking of several agreements. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Kenya is a sign of the deepening relations between the two countries.
India is ready to share its development experiences and expertise and concessional credit and capacity to assist in Kenya's development objectives.
Modi and Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta have signed several MOUs on cooperating in issues of defense, housing policy, import standards and healthcare. Key among them, a cancer research center.
We discussed and approved a proposal forwarded by India to fully fund the development and equipping of a cancer hospital here in Kenya.
India has also donated 30 field ambulances to Kenya to be used by the Defence Force. President Kenyatta is optimistic that the bilateral agreements will boost cooperation between the two countries in the areas of defence, tourism, immigration, agriculture and trade. Leslie Mirungu, CCTV.
Let's get you more perspective on what Narendra Modi's visit could mean for both countries. Adams Zolo, a political scientist, joins me here in our Nairobi studios. Adams, thanks very much for joining us. So why is this visit important or significant to these two countries?
Well, you have to remember that the last time a Prime Minister of India visited Kenya was in 1981 when Indira Gandhi did visit the country. And I think that one also has to look at the fact that there's a huge Indian population in Kenya that goes back to the time that they came to build the railway line. And they're also one of the most entrepreneurial group or race in the country, and therefore that means a lot. One also has to look at the fact that the Chinese have now been in the country, and when you look at it from a global perspective, we saw that there was an Africa-Indian summit in India last year where basically India was also reaching out to Africa. And given that India is seeking a permanent position in the UN Security Council, it will need African support, including Kenya's. So I think that is quite critical. And then also, when you look at the health sector, then you'll find that outside Kenya, one area that most Kenyans go to, both rich and poor, to try and get medical treatment is always India. So I think it's not, it did not come as a surprise that one of the areas in which they signed a pact was in the health sector.
And let's talk a little bit more about that, because Kenya's health and pharmaceutical sectors have very strong ties with Indian companies. So in terms of policy direction, how can the two governments enhance cooperation levels, especially when we talk about availability of cheap generic drugs?
I think one of the things that you have to look at in Kenya is that there's always been a move by the government to try and have health care for all. And most of the time, the private companies, the private hospitals have resisted it because that would mean getting business out of their hands. And therefore, one of the things that the two countries can do is to have a government-to-government agreements that cushion those who are poor. You'll find that because our National Hospital Insurance Fund doesn't really capture most of the people in the informal sectors, or even if it does capture the kind of concessions or benefits they get from it is very, very meager. And most of the time they have to rely on government hospital, dispensary, clinics to get these drugs, whether free for disaster cases like HIV/AIDS or tuberculosis and so on, and also to pay a certain fee for the drugs that they get. So if there can be a government-to-government relationship that ensures that the very needy in society can get a cushion out of the generic drugs, then I think that could be
great. And of course they signed the Defense Cooperation Pact. So what does this mean? How beneficial is this to the two countries when we talk about dealing with the threat of terrorism and just general insecurity?
Well, I think the first thing again that one has to look at is that Kenya is one of the countries that basically has a long coastline, and in that long coastline you have the Indian Ocean. So basically you're saying that Kenya is one of the gateways to India. Within that long coastline, we know that there's a lot of maritime security that goes on, and therefore they'll need to harness their cooperation together in order to ensure that there's maritime security that is beneficial to both. We also know that there's a lot of piracy in the Indian Ocean. Again, this is one area in which they can cooperate. But more importantly, from a general perspective on terrorism and defense, is that both India and Kenya also face terrorist organizations which basically one can say don't fight conventionally. So if they were to enter a defense pact, but then basically it would mean that they would share intelligence and maybe also share people-to-people and social intelligence that can help each of them combat these problems in their respective countries.
Great insights, Adams. Thanks very much for joining us. Adams Law here in studio with us.